So what's going to happen to the residents? Is fake meat the future? The government invests more than $1 million in a company making plant-based chicken, mince and sausages. Golf New Zealand takes a swing at Auckland Council over plans to open courses up to the likes of cyclists and joggers. Bad-mouthing local politicians is practically a national pastime. Now Carden Council's issued a challenge. If you think you can do a better job, then step up this election. And all hail a new weapon to fight the enemy of the sewer, the mighty fatberg.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Madiye, I'm Evie Ashton. The dispute between allied health workers and district health boards has taken a major step towards being resolved. There's been a new offer from district health boards this afternoon, and their union is recommending the members accept it. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
About 10,000 of the health workers went on strike last week and were looking at doing it again. But their union, the PSA, says that's now off the table as they consider the new offer from the DHBs. It says it's sending that to workers to consider tomorrow and won't reveal details until they've had a chance to see it. Allied health workers is a broad term for staff who aren't doctors and nurses, including everything from psychologists and physios to the people who clean surgical equipment.
Rotorua Council has gone to the Environment Court seeking enforcement orders against 9 emergency housing motels. A council spokesperson says the move follows attempts to engage with operators to make sure they're compliant if they want to continue offering emergency housing. Councillor Tanya Tapsell, who chairs the Operations and Monitoring Committee, says it's a last-ditch move.
Staff have effectively come to us and said this is the issue. These are the discussions we've tried to have. It's not working. And really, this is the last resort. I mean, we don't take anyone to court without really trying every other option first.
Mayor Steve Chadwick says council has an obligation to make sure people have accommodation that's safe and fit for purpose. You can hear more on this story in Checkpoint shortly. An immunologist says New Zealand may be better prepared for winter this year, but some groups are still vulnerable. The government reviewed the traffic light settings today, deciding to keep the country at orange ahead of winter spikes of illness. University of Otago professor Peter McIntyre says respiratory illnesses like COVID-19, RSV and the flu will spike this winter. He says while vaccines will protect most of the population from severe cases of COVID-19, some groups remain vulnerable.
Really, it's only a fairly small group now. We're talking about the very elderly and those with lots of other medical problems who, if they're boosted, are still at risk of severe COVID.
The traffic lights will be reviewed again at the end of June. A global expert in revitalising cities says Auckland needs to campaign to bring back workers, visitors and students to the city. Hundreds of business and civic leaders met in Auckland today to discuss the city's future at an event hosted by the economic development agency Auckland Unlimited. Post-pandemic city expert Greg Clark says many other cities in the world are halfway through their recovery from the pandemic, including across the Tasman, with office workers and visitors returning. He says they are Auckland's competitors and the city needs to attract people back. A cafe on the perimeter of Wellington's Te Aro Park is optimistic a makeover of the area will reduce antisocial behaviour in time. The redesign will remove 30 car parks on Dixon Street to widen the footpath and create on-street dining spaces for local businesses. Swimsuit cafe owner Tate Burge says he's had to confront people whose antisocial behaviour has, at times, made his customers and staff feel unsafe. He welcomes the plan but believes it will take time for some businesses to feel the benefits.
I think it's going to be like a bit of a long-term thing. I do think that retail will probably be the hardest hit at the start, just because people not being used to not being able to kind of park in Dixon Street. But I think over the longer term, if you can get through that first kind of initial year or two, people will start to know kind of how to use the space.
The Te Aro Park redesign is part of a project called the Pōneke Promise, which aims to improve safety in the capital. A Royal New Zealand Air Force Orion has found 2 missing boats from Kiribati within 10 nautical miles of each other. One was carrying 2 men, a woman and an 11-year-old child. The other vessel, Woodhaven 3, went missing late last week with 3 people on board. Survival packs containing water and locator beacons were dropped to both boats on Monday, and nearby vessels were contacted to rescue them. To sport, and former New Zealand captain Daniel Vettori has been appointed an assistant coach of the Australia men's cricket side. He steps into the role vacated by Andrew McDonald, who last month replaced Justin Langer as head coach. Vettori was part of the coaching staff on the Australian side's recent tour of Pakistan and has worked previously with McDonald in the Indian Premier League, where they played and coached together at Royal Challengers Bangalore. Vettori's international appointment follows that of another former Black Caps skipper, Brendan McCullum, who last week was named head coach of the England Test side. The Western Force must beat Moana Pacifica at Mount Smart Stadium tonight to keep their Super Rugby finals hopes alive. A loss will spell the end of their playoff ambitions and confirm the Highlanders in the 8th and final playoff spot. The Force are coming off 7 straight defeats, and coach Tim Sampson says they're desperate for a win.
We're going through a pretty lengthy losing streak now, and to have something to play for, but it does energise the guys, and it's all ahead of us now, and we're craving for this win.
Meanwhile, former All Black Dan Carter raised over $500,000 for UNICEF Aotearoa with last month's kickathon at Eden Park. And the sale of English Premier League football club Chelsea to a consortium led by Los Angeles Dodgers part owner Ted Bowley is set to be confirmed, according to British media reports. That's the news.
New Zealand on the world stage.
It's critical, apart from the photo opportunity, which is always welcome. Alliances and relationships are moving very fast now.
Our troops aid Ukraine's combat.
This is getting more involved in supporting Ukraine closer to the types of things that might raise the hackles for Russia.
And a line-up for the Tauranga election.
When I looked at the candidates, I was not impressed at all. I thought, well, this is the best that are going to put their hand up. We're in bad shape.
Words to the wise. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Taranaki, partly cloudy with isolated light showers mainly in the west. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly fine. Frosts tomorrow morning, becoming cloudy from Hawke's Bay southwards tomorrow evening with isolated light showers developing. For the central high country, also from Whanganui to Wellington, fine breaks, but clouds increasing tomorrow evening, bringing isolated light showers. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods and isolated showers north of Hokitika, mainly fine farther south. Mainly fine for Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha. Frosts tomorrow morning. Isolated showers developing in Dunedin this afternoon, then cloud and isolated showers spreading to the remainder of Otago, Canterbury and coastal Marlborough tomorrow. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with scattered showers, clearing from Fiordland tomorrow afternoon. And for Riekohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with showers more frequent tomorrow. It's 7 minutes past 5. The news team will have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The housing of 65 families in emergency accommodation could be under threat as the Rotorua Council takes legal action against several motels. They say 9 emergency housing motels have refused to engage and show they're compliant. Emergency housing is the talk of the town in the tourism hotspot, with some saying operators are costing the destination its prized reputation with visitors. The council says accommodation operators also providing emergency housing are required to have a dialogue with council on regulatory compliance, but some have failed to come to the table. Nick Trubridge has the story.
An accommodation stoush in one of our top tourism meccas, and now it's starting to turn ugly. Rotorua Council saying enough's enough and seeking enforcement orders against 9 of the town's emergency housing motels. Councillor and Operations and Monitoring Committee Chair Tanya Tapsell calling it a last resort.
Staff have effectively come to us and said this is the issue. These are the discussions we've tried to have. It's not working. And really, this is the last resort. I mean, we don't take anyone to court without really trying every other option first, because bear in mind that this unfortunately still does have a cost to the ratepayers to do so.
A cost to ratepayers, but according to some in the town, for the good of the tourism hotspot's reputation. A council spokeswoman has told Checkpoint the court action follows requests operators talk to Rotorua Lakes to make sure they're sticking to the rules and regs if they want to continue providing emergency housing. Councillor Tapsell says the move Executive has sufficient backing from her colleagues.
One of the tools we do have is making sure that people are complying and that their operations are fit for purpose for the use that they are in. So when you have motels that were previously for short-term stay, 1 or 2 nights, that's very different to what it's now being used as emergency housing, where people are effectively living in these motel rooms.
It follows a fairly ugly chapter for the tourist town. Last month, Checkpoint travelled to Rotorua, where it was told of fears tourists will be put off visiting. It was claimed the town's motels were seen as an investment class, the situation described as domestic poverty tourism. Councillor Tapsell says some motels are behind significant social issues, adding it's not just the town's reputation at stake.
We do know that there are known gang members who have been residing in these motels. There's been drugs and violence come from it, unfortunately. So to put that in a perspective, 1/3 of all family harm, violence, domestic violence calls in 1 week in Rotorua are going to emergency housing motels. That's 1/3. So it's been a significant drain not only on taxpayers' money. This is costing between $20 and $13 million a year in Rotorua alone, but also on police resources and social services resources.
Rotorua Economic Development Chief Executive Andrew Wilson has been a harsh critic of the emergency housing arrangements in the town.
We've got 13 properties that have been contracted by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, which have got wraparound services and certainly some management around how those facilities operate. And then we've got a larger number of motels that are funded via the emergency housing grants that the Ministry of Social Development provide. And certainly there's a real lack of management around those facilities, and the flow-on impacts are certainly felt by the surrounding community.
It's not clear how many families and individuals are staying at the 9 hotels subject to the court action. But I asked Mr Wilson whether there are broader considerations, greater issues at play here. If not emergency motels, where will these people go?
It seems only right that we're making sure that, properties that have been used for emergency housing are also fit for purpose. Look, we'd dearly love to see probably more houses being built. I think we're kind of, unfortunately, the amount of effort that seems to be going in at the wrong end of the kind of the housing continuum is one of those things that continues to be a bit frustrating.
Nick Fitzgerald owns an accommodation business in Rotorua while also serving as the head of the Rotorua Association of Motels. For that organisation, it's been a real fight to have some sort of action taken against motels it believes aren't delivering results for both the wider community and the people living in them.
It's going to produce, it will hopefully produce some good outcomes for the wider community. There'll be less disruption, there'll be less reputational damage, and also the community within those emergency housing motels is that there's going to be better services and, I guess, better accountability within them.
In a statement, Mayor Steve Chadwick told Checkpoint end-to-end support is in place for those needing emergency accommodation, but the council has an obligation to make sure people have housing that's safe and fit for purpose. The council says over the next 2 weeks, other operators will be invited to engage to make sure they're compliant if they want to continue providing a roof for those in need.
The Ministry of Social Development has just responded to that legal action. Bay of Plenty Regional Commissioner Mike Bryant says MSD has a good relationship with Rotorua Lakes Council and is happy to work through issues as required. He acknowledges the council's role overseeing the Resource Management and Building Act and that enforcement action may affect suppliers and MSD clients. Mr Bryant says steps to comply with council regulations are for the motels to take, given they are private businesses. However, MSD has encouraged them to engage with Rotorua Lakes Council. It is almost 14 minutes past 5. Kia mo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government's looking to grow the plant-based meat market, investing more than $1 million in a sustainable food company. The loans from the $200 million Regional Strategic Partnership Fund that aims to build sustainable, inclusive and productive regional economies. The Kāpiti-based sustainable foods brand, Plant, markets fake meats like veggie-based mince, sausages and chicken nuggets. The Minister for Economic and Regional Development is one of 4 ministers who signed off on the deal. Stuart Nash says it's not an admission that we're relying too heavily on unsustainable agriculture.
What it is an admission is that we do some things very, very well in this country, and one of them is produce protein. And Damien O'Connell would be very remiss if I didn't say that, we have some of the best farmers, if not the best farmers in the world, and they produce protein from meat exceptionally well. But the world is changing, the world is moving, their tastes are being refined, and also as the cost of meat increases, people are looking for cheaper protein alternatives, and this is an alternative. So this isn't going to replace meat, and we're certainly not going to see a whole lot of our dairy farms or sheep and beef farms planted in vegetables that are going to make vegetable-based protein. But what it is recognising where global trends are going and making sure that we're riding that wave and we're part of it.
So sustainability is one of the criteria for giving loans under this scheme, right? So is it more sustainable to produce a slab of fake chicken than it is to produce real chicken?
Well, we do know that, let's look at the facts. Agriculture is a big emitter in this country. But what I'm not prepared to do is to say that we are going to replace one form of protein with another form of protein, i.e. this is a different market, different demographic, and it's really innovative. So, we will always need our farmers producing high-quality meat protein. This is just a different part of that whole equation.
Understand that, but given the criteria of sustainability, as a comparison, do you know whether it's more sustainable to make this plant-based meat than it is to produce a steak or a chicken or a comparable meat product?
Well, it is from a methane perspective, of that there's no doubt. But what I will say is that I wouldn't call it fake meat in any way, shape or form. I mean, it does taste a lot like meat, and for some it does. It is a meat replacement, but for a whole lot of people it is because of lifestyle. They're not, or they may be vegans or vegetarians, therefore they don't want to eat meat. This isn't a replacement. This is just another product that they can have in their diet. So please don't think that what we are doing is taking those juicy steaks away from the plates of Kiwis or overseas consumers and replacing it with this. It's a different market segment.
So would you like more New Zealanders to eat plant-based meat alternatives?
Oh, if that's what they'd like to do, I'd absolutely support this. I mean, this could be a world-leading industry for us. I think the figure is something like the global market for plant-based protein will be $80 billion by 2030. So it is growing at a great rate of knots. We have the global brand that talks about food integrity, food safety, food innovation. So I think this company is perfectly positioned to take advantage of the changing demographics and the changing dietary requirements of a huge segment of the global population.
Yeah, and that suggests that, you might want more people to move to it. You've invested $1.25 million in this company, which means you'd like it to be successful, and success means expansion and more people buying it. So back to my original question, would you like more New Zealanders to eat plant-based meat alternatives?
Oh, Lisa, I'm not going to tell people what they should eat. But what I will say is there are two distinct segments here. I mean, the global population is expected to grow by 2 billion in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So again, we're not finding it out here. So the people who are going to eat plant-based protein are probably not the sort of people who are going to eat a big piece of juicy steak or a chicken breast or even a fish fillet. They may be, but it is a different market segment. I'm not a vegetarian, but I don't eat meat that often, and I understand the value proposition around plant-based protein from a health and wellbeing perspective. There's no doubt about that. And I understand the value proposition from a sustainability perspective, but I also understand the value proposition of sheep and beef, certainly in terms of our overseas markets. And also keep in mind that a lot of our export cuts are aimed at the ultra-premium end of the market. This is aimed at a slightly different end of the market.
So, what products did you get to chow down on? Which ones did you like?
I like them all, actually. I started with a wrap, which, it looked like chicken. It wasn't chicken. Like I say, it's not a chicken alternative. It's just plant-based protein. I had a hamburger, and that was very, very nice. I mean, the food's divine. The thing is, Lisa, is these guys know you can't produce healthy food if it tastes like cardboard, because no one's going to eat it. So they have spent a whole lot of time ensuring that not only is this healthy and sustainable, but that it actually tastes good. And believe me, this stuff tastes fantastic.
Minister, Do you reckon that you can grow bigger biceps with plant-based meat?
You absolutely can. In fact, Dorian Yates, who used to be Mr. Olympia a number of times, I think he's vegetarian. And believe it or not, I believe that Arnold Schwarzenegger is a vegetarian. There you go.
And that was Minister Stuart Nash there. Golfers are accusing Auckland Council of foul play over a plan to develop their courses into more versatile public places. The council wants local boards to acknowledge it isn't sustainable to keep $2.9 billion worth of public land locked up exclusively for golf, saying only 6% of the city plays the sport. But Golf New Zealand is trying to stop the council in its tracks, saying their claims are outdated, misleading and unfair. Katie Todd reports.
It's no secret land in Auckland is in short supply when it comes to houses and industry. What the city isn't short of is golf greens. 38 courses are dotted around the super city, including 13 on council land, most of which offer a full 18 holes. Those alone take up an area 1.25 times bigger than the city centre. As each of their leases inch towards their expiration dates, Auckland Council wants to tweak the overall plan that governs them, saying it's time they at least accommodate other activities like walking, running and cycle paths. They're striking some fierce opposition.
This draft golf investment plan is filled with outdated information and factual errors. The plan does not provide a fair representation of the true value of golf or golf facilities to Auckland.
That's Jacob Cameron from Golf New Zealand, who's been following the council's plan as it goes to each of the city's local boards for their consideration. Today's stops included the Maunga Kia Tamaki local board. He's asking members not to endorse it, explaining that post-COVID, golf in Auckland is actually going gangbusters.
Within Auckland, the membership has grown over 30% in recent years, and since a new young people strategy has been in place from 2018, there's been an increase in 71% of under-19 club membership.
Some local board members think he has a point. Maunga Kia Tamaki member Tony Woodcock questions how golf courses could safely accommodate other recreational activities.
I can't see how they want golf courses all of a sudden to be this fitness trail that people can go hiking through or walking through with golf balls flying around them. To me it seems ludicrous.
Debbie Burrows fears endorsing the plan will mean golf courses are eventually taken away altogether to fit housing and infrastructure. Already there's been a 5-year battle to keep Chamberlain Park in Mount Albert as an 18-hole golf course, rather than cut it in half to fit a sports field and public park.
I mean, where does it stop? We're putting in more housing and we're potentially endorsing a strategy under the movers' words themselves that it's okay to do the likes of Chamberlain Park and take away these facilities for housing and roads. I'm sorry, that's exactly what my fear with this resolution.
But some people on the streets of Auckland think maybe it is worth considering new uses for golf courses and say housing could be a valid use.
I mean, there is a need for housing, so if the space isn't being used, then I can assume it takes a lot of water to actually upkeep these golf courses. So you can maybe use the resources in a better way.
There seems to be a shortage of housing. I don't know if there's a shortage of golf courses.
I just feel there's such an opportunity for us to start making a change when it comes to housing.
Maunga Kia Tamaki local board member Peter McGlashan thinks maintaining the status quo isn't the way to go.
There isn't anything that I can see in the resolutions that we should be fearful of. It's purely a way of starting the conversation.
Chris Makaware isn't taking Golf New Zealand's membership claims at face value.
I honestly believe that there's a lot of people registered to play golf, but it doesn't state how many people are actually playing golf at that certain time. I think there has been an increase because of COVID, but I don't think there's been enough increase to actually stop what council is trying to investigate.
If the council's plan proceeds, it won't mean all golf courses are suddenly opened up for public use. Each will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Golf New Zealand wants Auckland Council to go back to the drawing board and redraft its plan.
Homai o whakaaro, I would love your feedback. Nō reira ānei na kaupapa mō te hōtakane. What do you think about golf courses moving over to share with walkers and joggers and cyclists? Maybe one day a week for other sports. Let me know your reckons on that. And also the fake meat. Some of you don't like me calling it fake meat, but it is marketed as sausages, chicken and mince, and it's clearly not those things. Anyway, plant alternatives to meat. Should we be investing more in that? Text me, Pātui Mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The country's traffic light is staying orange, with the government and health experts warning of a rocky winter. An immunologist says it will be a winter of uncertainty, and the COVID minister says Omicron cases will increase over the cooler months. So the status quo stays for now. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Winter 2022 is a tale of two parts. There's the bad news that respiratory viruses like COVID-19, RSV or the flu are primed to spread.
I think in climate zones like New Zealand, there will be extra issues with winter. We know that all respiratory viruses transmit more readily indoors.
And then there's the good news that we can now stop or at least slow their spread.
We've got tools and we've also got antivirals against both flu and COVID. So there's lots of things in the toolbox, and we just need to make sure we're using them as well as possible.
Peter McIntyre is an immunologist, University of Otago professor and medical advisor at the University of Auckland's Immunisation Advisory Centre. He says New Zealand is in pretty good shape heading into winter, but still has to protect its most vulnerable.
Really, it's only a fairly small group now. We're talking about the very elderly and those with lots of other medical problems who, if they're boosted, are still at risk of severe COVID.
The government reviewed the traffic light settings today, deciding to keep the entire country at orange until at least late June. But the Green Party wants it to go further and adopt a COVID-19 action plan for schools, pulled together by health experts at the University of Otago. The plan would mandate mask use indoors and require close contacts of cases to self-isolate. The Green Party's COVID-19 and education spokesperson, Tiano Tuiono, says New Zealand shouldn't lose sight of looking after those most at risk.
Last week we crossed over the 1,000 COVID-related deaths, and it didn't get much pickup at all. It's like people are saying we are getting back to normal, but actually normal left the building a long time ago, and we actually have to get back to focusing on our immunocompromised whānau, our disabled whānau.
It's been nearly 6 months since New Zealand reported its first Omicron case, but the outbreak is far from over. Daily case numbers have flattened throughout the country, but they're starting to rise again in the northern region. The COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, says modelling is predicting secondary waves of cases in the coming months. Even so, both National and ACT say the traffic light system is old news.
It's time to dump the traffic light system entirely.
We need to get away from this culture of every month or so the minister turns up and announces that we're staying or moving to a certain level.
National's Chris Bishop says the traffic light system should go and be replaced by simple mask rules. RNZ asked to interview the COVID-19 minister Chris Hipkins, but he declined. David Seymour says if Mr Hipkins wants to set the rules, he should front them too.
If the government's not prepared to front and justify imposing costs on people, I don't think you're going to get a high level of compliance from people prepared to do it.
The government has set aside $284 million to implement its COVID-19 immunisation strategy and a further $189 million to buy more vaccines this year and next. National's Chris Bishop says the plan to roll out a fourth COVID-19 vaccine to those who need it should be announced sooner rather than later.
Criticising our politicians is close to a national pastime, but are you all talk or are you prepared to put your hand up for a spot on your council? Local body elections are coming up in a few months and one council is actively trying to boost the number of contenders. Carden Council, which is nearly 100 k's north of Wellington, has launched a campaign calling for more people to throw their hats in the ring, and joining me now is the council spokesperson Elisa Brown. Elisa, first off, do people actually call your town Whātāton?
Yes, they do. There was a instance in the paper where we were referred to as Whātāton. So, hey, why not own it and say, if you don't want to be known as Whātāton, let's get on board and do something about it.
So that's part of your campaign, right? And what else are you pegging your campaign on?
Look, we're trying to bring forward all the hot topics and discussions that we know are out there in the community. So all those things people are passionate about, their rates, water restrictions, water storage, those angry online comments that are out there, and then the positives too. We, at our Kāpiti Event Centre and climate change actions and walking and cycling trails, these are all the things we hear day in and day out. So we want people to know, if this sounds like you, stand for council.
Sounds like a lot of grumpy people.
It's local government. They're going to have some grumpy people, but you know what? We don't call them grumpy. We call them passionate, because that's what they are. They're passionate residents, and we want those passionate people to get out from behind the keyboard and come and sit around the council table.
What's the pay for a councillor?
For a councillor, so it's you've caught me off guard there. I think for a Carden councillor, the remuneration is around 20,000. So it all goes into a pool and gets divided up.
And how many hours do you have to put in to collect your paycheck?
Sorry, how many hours?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that depends on how many hours that councillor is willing to put in for their community. You can do the minimum and turn up to the meetings, or you can be out there talking with your constituents, getting to know the community. And, we see that in a small district like Carden. We see our elected members getting out there and knowing people on a first-name basis.
Because you don't want, do you, Elisa, the people who are just going to dial it in and turn up for the minimum to get their paycheck of 25K a year?
Absolutely not. No, that's the purpose of this campaign. We want those people that really care about the community and care about these issues to put themselves in a situation where they've got an official capacity to represent their community and make the changes that they think our community deserves.
If there are so many passionate people there, Elisa, as you call them, why do you need this campaign to get them to get off their butts?
I tell you what, it is a big thing to put yourself out there and say, I'm going to be an elected member for the community. I'm going to put myself in a political capacity. That is putting yourself in the limelight, putting your name on the line, and we know that it's a big ask for people. But like I said, they've got that passion, and that's all you really need for local government. People think you've got to come in with all this political knowledge and experience, but that's not the case. Some knowledge is always going to be helpful, but we want that true representation of our community. We want farmers, we want retirees, we want young stay-at-home mums, we want professionals who commute to Wellington, we want straight out of high school and wanting to make a difference for our youth and rangatahi. So, that is why you need a campaign like this. It's a once-in-a-3-year opportunity. You've got 4 weeks to put your name out there. Let's do this.
Kia ora, Elisa. Thanks for joining us. That is Elisa Brown there, selling the dream of being on the Kāpiti Council. Kia ora e te iwi e haere nei e checkpoint. Calls for a campaign to get people back into Auckland CBD. A Kāpiti company making plant-based meats gets a cash injection from the government. And some toilet talk. New rules about what you should and shouldn't flush down the loo. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko Iwi anō tēnei.
A new offer from district health boards means its dispute with allied health workers could soon be resolved. About 10,000 workers, who include psychologists and physiotherapists, went on strike last week, but have now postponed further action. The PSA says it will recommend its members vote in favour of the new offer tomorrow. Rotorua Council has gone to the Environment Court to seek enforcement orders against 9 emergency accommodation providers in the city. The council says the motels have refused to show they're compliant with the Resource Management and Building Act, and court action is a last resort. The Ministry of Social Development's Regional Commissioner, Mike Bryant, says motels are private businesses, but it encourages them to comply with council regulations. The government's review of traffic light settings today resulted in keeping the country at orange ahead of winter spikes and respiratory illness. Otago University Professor Peter McIntyre is expecting jumps in cases of COVID-19, RSV and the flu, and says some remain vulnerable to severe illness despite vaccines. The traffic lights will be reviewed again at the end of June. A global expert in revitalising cities says Auckland needs to campaign to bring back workers, visitors and students to the city. Hundreds of business and civic leaders met in Auckland today to discuss the city's future at an event hosted by the economic development agency Auckland Unlimited. Post-pandemic city expert Greg Clark says many other cities in the world are halfway through their recovery, with office workers and visitors returning. And 7 people missing near Kiribati since last week have been found by an Air Force Orion within 10 nautical kilometres of each other. Survival packs were dropped to both boats yesterday, and all those on board, including an 11-year-old child, are reported to be well. Those are the headlines. We'll update you with full news and weather at 6.
Nā mihi e hoa, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who is here in the studio to talk business. Let's start with Napier Port. Rough waters, for their half-year profit?
Rough waters indeed. They're being squeezed on both sides. On one hand, ships aren't arriving necessarily on time or even arriving at all when they're scheduled to, or rather scheduled to. And on the other hand, the volume of exports is patchy because we've got farmers who are struggling with seasonal variations, weather patterns, etc., but also labor shortages, that kind of thing. So things are not really running smoothly on either end of the supply chain for Napier Ports. And that's reflected in their first half result. They made about $9 million compared with $10.6 million the year earlier. So that's a fall. But then they've also had a 17% drop in volumes, cargo volumes, as well. 40 fewer ships, and of course no cruise ships either. So overall, it's not been a great result for Napier Ports, but they are expecting things to pick up. I mean, we're going to see some cruise ships come
from October.
Yeah, although we're not going to probably see as many as they were kind of hoping for. So we'll see how that goes. But for sure, hopefully for Napier Ports, the worst is behind them.
Okay, now you've talked about this before, PushPay. This is the company where you can make electronic donations to churches, right? And you mentioned that there was a takeover bid in the works. What do we know now?
Well, they were put into a trading halt earlier today and then announced that a couple of their shareholders are looking at making a bid for the company. So together, it's a company called BGH Capital, another one called Sixth Street. They together own 20.3% of PushPay. Now, that the offer, there isn't actually an offer as such. PushPay are contemplating a number of offers, according to what they're saying. But the market is expecting something good because their share price just bounced once they came out of the trading halt to over 20% increase to finish the day up 13% at the close. So pretty hefty margin has been already applied to that share price in anticipation of some kind of deal. Some of the analysts that we've spoken to expect that the company's probably valued somewhere around $2 billion. So it would be a substantial takeover should it go ahead.
Absolutely. Okay, let's put on our sensible shoes and go for a trot around the rest of the market.
Yeah, so look, stocks looked really good overnight because President Joe Biden suggested that maybe he would review the Chinese trade tariffs. So, well, that kind of got the market a bit excited, but it didn't last long, unfortunately. Asian markets slipped, and then that sort of affected our markets. So we finished down 0.6%. That was a 69-point drop to 11,247. The New Zealand dollar is also slightly weaker, and I mean really slightly weaker at 64.3 US cents. I think yesterday was 64.5. 90.8 Australian, so we were just over 90 just the other day, and 51.2 British pence. And we'll just have to see how the market shapes up tomorrow after we hear from the Reserve Bank.
About the OCR.
That's right.
All right, we'll talk to you then. Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business news. Now it's time for some toilet talk. A new weapon's been launched to fight the enemy of the sewer, the mighty fatberg. You know, wet wipes that get stuck on the way down and catch fat and cooking oil and grow into monstrous globules that bog up the whole system. Now a new standard's been developed to make sure those wipes and other things marketed as flushable actually are. So how does it work? Watercare Head of Service Delivery, Sharon Danks, is here to explain. Kia ora, Sharon. What's the deal with these standards? How do they work?
Oh, good evening. The new standard's going to set some parameters for the wet wipe manufacturers so that we can ensure that the wet wipes will disintegrate within a reasonable time, within a few hours, and that they contain no plastics. And that means that the products which are labelled as flushable with this new standard won't get stuck with the fats into tree roots on the way down the sewer pipes, and they won't cause the blockages and overflows that we see today from the fatbergs that you mentioned before.
So, in terms of the definition of flushable, you mentioned a couple of things there. No plastics, and how quickly do they have to degrade?
Yeah, no, how quickly they have to degrade is really important. If you put toilet paper down the toilet, it'll disintegrate and become a pulp within a couple of hours, whereas many of the wet wipes that we have today, they disintegrate over many months. So it's just ensuring that anything that's labelled flushable has that quick disintegration, so that it doesn't get caught up in the sewers and the pumps.
Sorry to interrupt, Sharon. So does that mean to label a wet wipe flushable, it will have to, dissolve as quickly as loo paper?
Pretty much, effectively, yep.
So what are the consequences of this then? Do people now have to label their products? Because as I understand it, this is just voluntary, isn't it?
It is just a voluntary process at the moment. And it is a labelling thing that we're hoping that consumers will start to look for the flushable symbol that WASA and Australian New Zealand standards have come up with, and choose to use these products rather than the more traditional wet wipes.
So if somebody labels or puts a sticker on their product or calls it flushable and it does not meet that criteria that you've previously told us, I mean, what's the comeback if it's only a voluntary standard?
I think at the moment that there is no comeback. They wouldn't be able to use the official symbol of the standard, but because it's a voluntary standard, we would just have to continue on our current path of public education and helping people make the choice to put wet wipes into the bin rather than down the toilet.
What about on grounds of false advertising, though?
Potentially, unfortunately, that's not my sort of area, but I think it would be false advertising.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we used to be told the 3 Ps, right? So can you just explain to people what that is, and is that still what you're advising people?
Yes, absolutely. The 3 Ps is what we want people to put down the toilet, which is pee, poo and toilet paper. So pee, poo and paper. And that's what sewers and the pumps and things that work on the sewers were designed for. So that's what we'd prefer people to keep putting down the toilet, and everything else should go into the rubbish bin.
So even though you now have these standards where potentially companies will be able to label their products, the preference is that you don't flush them regardless?
Yeah, that would still be our preference. But if you do have to flush them, we'd prefer you flush one that disintegrates quickly, like toilet paper.
So Sharon, just give us an idea of how much of a problem this is. What does it cost us? I mean, how often do you find one of these giant fatbergs in the system?
Yeah, and here in Auckland we have about 5,000 dry weather wastewater overflows in a year, and the majority of them are caused by a combination of fats, wet wipes and tree roots, and that costs Watercare approximately $5.5 million every year to clean up afterwards, and that's not counting the environmental damage of having wastewater overflowing into the environment when the pipes get blocked.
So disgusting, Sharon. Off the top of your head, do you know what the biggest one is you've ever found?
There's been some quite big ones in Auckland, probably about a 600 millimetre diameter one over on the North Shore once. So that's quite a big one.
That is a lesson to people to follow the rules, the 3 Ps. Thanks for joining us. That is Sharon Danks, who's Watercare Head of Service Delivery there, and talking about those standards for what can be labelled flushable. Auckland's been told to start a campaign to bring back workers, visitors and students to the city. A global expert in revitalising cities says after the pandemic, Auckland needs to catch up. Hundreds of business and civic leaders met in Auckland today to discuss the city's future at an event hosted by the economic development agency, Auckland Unlimited. Reporter Amy Williams was there.
It's the new normal in a society living with COVID, but the irony didn't go unnoticed. Some speakers at today's conference couldn't make it.
I'd like to say that we're coming out of the pandemic, but I noticed that a number of our speakers today can't be with us because, like many in this room, they have caught COVID.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff opened the third annual Auckland's Future Now conference. The first was held in response to the national lockdown in 2020 to discuss the city's recovery. So how much has changed?
Our challenge now is to promote a recovery that matches the rate of the impact that COVID had on us in a negative sense. We need to recover positively. And the good news is that we are seeing that turnaround.
Post-pandemic city expert Greg Clark says many other cities in the world are halfway through their recovery from the pandemic, including across the Tasman, with office workers and visitors returning. He says they are Auckland's competitors.
A new competition is emerging, particularly with those countries that came out of the restrictions quickly. They have garnered a first mover advantage. And in New Zealand, you've got to think about what the second mover advantage could be.
Mr Clark says Auckland needs to campaign to bring back office workers, students and visitors to the city centre.
We need to campaign to win back our tourists, our students, our office workers, our visitors, and eventually, of course, our real estate investors and our migrants. We need to make it easy for people to come back to the city. We need to make it exciting.
Alicia Staples manages a VR company based in Auckland, but said she'd probably be enticed to Australia if she was setting up now. She says the Australian government has been quicker to see how the creative sector boomed during COVID, but here there's a dire shortage of skilled workers.
For the first time ever, we are going to outsource overseas because we can't find the talent locally. So it's a bit of a negative comment, but it's actually the right time because the pendulum is swinging and I don't think it's gone too far to correct it.
Business leader Phil O'Reilly says the country feels even more isolated from the rest of the world.
We are the least connected that I've ever seen on a person-to-person basis. We are the most disconnected that I've ever seen in the time that I've been dealing globally in business, and that's now 25, 30 years.
He's the former chief executive of Business NZ and says businesses need to reconnect face-to-face.
2 a.m. Zoom calls don't cut it. I'm going to get on a plane next week and actively reconnect. My friends in Europe and the US are poking the borax at me that I'm still alive. So I'm going to get out and talk to them and start talking up to them about Auckland and New Zealand and that we're back.
Mark Thomas is a director of Committee for Auckland, a members group for city leaders who want to engage in its future. He'd like to see a new group formed to revitalise the city centre and do the mahi.
Give them the decision-making responsibility. We don't need more consultation groups. We want to have the business people, the owners, but also the not-for-profits, the City Mission and others actually at the table making decisions to say, well, we know what needs to be done with the city centre. Give us the power to kind of make that change.
Sustainability champion Izzy Fenwick urged Auckland leaders to include younger generations at the table.
If Auckland can prioritise really thinking about and engaging with future generations' needs and expectations and building them in, we will create a thriving city. But if we don't, our next generation will find cities that do and we will lose them, and the loss of that critical talent will be felt by every industry here.
Big challenges our biggest city faces in getting back to business.
And it's 12 minutes to 6 and time for your feedback on golf courses. A lot on this. This listener says, I totally agree that golf courses should be opened up to others. This is a tiny number of people using large areas of public land that should be available for all. There are still private courses if they need them. This one's an interesting one. Forget about golf clubs. Get rid of the race course. Leave horse racing for the country clubs. That's a dying, outdated sport and animals aren't harmed on a golf course. Another person says, I wouldn't want houses on our local golf course, but it would be an excellent park for everyone to enjoy rather than a few golfers. On the issue of Kāpiti trying to rally people to stand for council, this one, full points to those that stand, but it's become such a hugely demanding role nowadays. Endless meetings, phone calls, emails, and it's usually only a part-time role for folks that have other jobs and businesses. And there's complex needs in the community as well. A Wellington park that's turned into a trouble spot is getting a makeover in a bid to improve safety and stomp out antisocial behaviour. Council is slashing close to 50 car parks as part of the change. Rosie Gordon and cameraman Angus Drever have the story.
Te Aro Park sits in the middle of the city, a green space between Lambton Quay and Courtney Place. It's a thoroughfare for foot traffic, but in recent years, its reputation's gone downhill. Now it's a spot well known for antisocial behaviour and crime. Tate Burge owns Swimsuit, a popular cafe that sits on the park's perimeter.
Yeah, I have to confront a few people quite often for situations outside, whether they're making customers feel uncomfortable or kind of trying to have a go at a staff member or something like that.
He's hopeful an urban design plan aimed at improving safety actually works.
It's quite cool to see like an actual quite big change that is going to change the kind of way that people use the space around here.
The redesign will see the footpath widen on the northern side of Dixon Street with wooden decking and planter boxes. Some parks will be turned into outdoor dining areas for hospitality, but that will come at a cost to drivers. 30 car parks will be removed.
We work with the businesses to make sure that the loading zone won't be affected. We are providing short-term parking for people that they want to grab a coffee in the morning. They still can do that.
Wellington City Council Urban Design Manager Faz Zamani says the removal of car parks is essentially a physical decluttering aimed at making it easier to spot risky behaviour.
Providing more visibility helps our CCTV operators to see the area better. Also, it creates passive surveillance for the businesses and people who are in the businesses to see what's happening in the park.
The makeover is part of the Poneki Promise, a joint effort by police, the council and businesses to deal with safety concerns that have cropped up in the capital. First Retail is one of the organisations involved. Managing Director Chris Wilkinson is confident the changes to the park's design will cut out bad behaviour by encouraging more people to come in.
So what we call it is capable guardianship. So a much broader audience of people into those areas, and that in itself helps moderate antisocial behaviour significantly.
But park users we spoke to weren't keen on the changes.
I would rather have the car parks. I make use of them. The places I frequent, yeah, this is a convenient place to park.
If anything, I'd like to see more regular security and police around this area. This is actually, when it's dark, I've had 3 fights just walking from the gym back up here.
Latest police data shows 271 people have been victims of crime this year alone in the central Wellington area. 59 of those were acts intended to cause injury. And in February, a pedestrian died here on Dixon Street after being hit by a car in the early hours of a Saturday morning. A shooting on Dixon Street put the area back in the spotlight at the end of April. Councillor Jill Day says the changes are necessary.
There have been crime issues, but there's also it's not an easy space to operate in, and I think it's important that people do have the space and that the place is safe.
Ms Day believes an increase in short-term social housing is a factor, but she rejects the idea the makeover is aimed at pushing those people to other parts of the city.
There will still be space here for them. It's a beautiful big park area, so there's space for people to be here, and obviously with our centre, community centre in Suwahiawhena and people's homes that are here at the moment, they are still very much part of this space in this place, and we really do want to make sure that we are being welcoming.
Plans are also underway to remove Te Aro Park's public toilets, which don't meet crime prevention through design standards. Construction work on the rest of the park's makeover starts in early July.
And if you were listening to that story from Rosie and Angus on radio, do check out the video. It'll be on our webpage. In Tauranga, bus drivers and patrons are being terrorised by passengers brandishing tasers and knives and hurling racial abuse. And the shocking reality is that the perpetrators are young teens under 14 years of age. Now the Regional Council has cracked down on free student fares in a bid to stop the hoodlums wreaking havoc anytime they please. Bay of Plenty reporter Leah Tebbit has more.
Tauranga bus drivers are frightened and intimidated, and that's despite the council funding security officers at bus stops since 2020. Representing the drivers, First Union's Graham McKean says it's the worst case of abuse he has seen in his 20 years.
Buses are getting broken into, vandalised, passengers are getting harassed, assaulted, drivers have had death threats. There's been a taser pulled and a knife from these young kids.
Now the council has moved to limit free student bus travel to just 4 hours a day, between 7 till 9 in the morning and between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. Mr McKean says cutting the fares is recognition of what drivers have been complaining about for years.
By putting a financial incentive in there, it's going to disincentivise them to travel as often. I mean, of course, the flip side is it undermines what regional councils are trying to do by creating a user-friendly public transportation system that's going to be utilised.
Bay of Plenty Regional Council Chair says it's disappointing that safety on the buses has become such a concern that free fares needed to be limited. The decision came days after a mall worker on his break sustained a significant injury to his eye when he was allegedly assaulted by a group of youths. Council Chair Doug Leader says the youths are using free council services to organise their illegal activities, and this is a step that has to be taken.
The actions of a few, probably no more than about 30 or 40, and there's a really hardcore group of probably 15 to 20, have abused the privilege. As a consequence of them abusing that privilege and the safety aspects that we have to address, has compromised the ability of many to enjoy a free service.
Mr Leader denies the council is pushing the issue under the rug by removing free fares. However, he does acknowledge more work is needed by other agencies to combat the societal issues which are behind the criminal behaviour.
When they can go into a public library and communicate with their colleagues by computer systems and move from location to location where they've organised get-togethers and fights with opposing groups, and they use the bus service as the vehicle to get there, we've just got to impede that.
Police are also worried about how the troublemakers are using the free bus service. In a submission to Council, Inspector Clifford Paxton says police raised the concern that free fares enabled these youths to move around the network easily. He says it appears buses have been used for teens to travel to fights organised in various areas. Police declined RNZ's request for an interview, but in a written statement, Inspector Paxton says it will be monitoring the impact the changes have on antisocial behaviour across Tauranga. His comments have been voiced.
Police continue to respond for calls for service and seek to have increased police presence at 9 areas of demand. Police will take appropriate enforcement action where behaviour arises that causes disorder or alarm in the community.
The change to the free fares will be in place from June 4th.
The UN says Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports is a declaration of war on global food security. Its food programme fears it could push millions of people into famine amid severe cost of living crises. The BBC's Faisal Islam has more.
Across the world, food and energy crises are hitting households, increasing social instability and hunger, and leading to whole countries going bust. Sri Lanka at first, but more are feared to be heading in the same direction, from Southeast Asia to the Middle East, and it's also affecting the UK too. With Russia's war in Ukraine making these supply shocks much worse, the economic stakes are very high here and across the world, according to one of Britain's top bankers.
Many of the conversations have been, what percentage likelihood do you attach to a recession? I'll say 50-50.
Right now, those emerging markets racked up debts understandably during the pandemic, and many, perhaps dozens, are going to go bust. Is that how you see it?
Hopefully not dozens, but when you have a combination of political instability, an economic body blow, cost of living crisis, also importing energy, it's going to be very tough.
Part of the problem is that the natural response that should bring down energy or food prices, producing more, isn't working because, for example, Russia is blockading Ukraine's food exports.
Well, if we don't open those ports, you're talking about a declaration of war on global food security. It will have extraordinary consequences. We are already facing the worst food crisis since World War II. And when you take 400 million people that are fed by the food that comes out of Ukraine and you shut that off, and then you add on top of that fertilizer problems, droughts, food costs, fuel costs, we're looking at a hailstorm on Earth.
The world's biggest importers of wheat, the Egyptians, told us they can cope for now, though prices are surging.
The government is putting in place and utilizing tools to limit that price increase, especially on the most vulnerable. We do have a high degree of resilience in terms of our stocks of basic commodities, and we'll continue to explore and to cooperate with our partners in alternative sources.
And the fear of many is that this is not an accident. It's a conscious strategy, the weaponization of famine by the Kremlin.
So we need
the assistance of our partners, international partners, to secure our exports through the seaports. So I mean that from the defense point of view, to find a way to build a corridor or another solution, how to give the opportunity to Ukrainian vessels to export.
So some sort of safe passage.
Safe passage, yeah.
Events in Ukraine have already proven horrific, but mountains of its grain blocked from reaching the world's most hungry could yet make that worse.
Right, time for your feedback now. We had a discussion earlier about these new standards for what can be labelled flushable in terms of putting stuff down the toilet. The advice was stick with the 3 Ps, pee, poo and paper, toilet paper. Someone says, what about P for periods? Tampons, ? Can't believe this isn't being talked about alongside pee, poos and paper. No, tampon starts with T, and the suggestion is that you put them in a rubbish bin. A neighbour, this person says, my neighbour puts cooked chicken bones and carcasses down the toilet. Is that okay? Why? Why would you do that? And on the subject of Rotorua and the council taking legal action against a number of social housing motels there, this listener says, I am a sales representative travelling and staying in Rotorua once a month. But recently this isn't the case. The situation has driven me and my other company's reps out of staying at Rotorua, and we have now moved our business to Taupo.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Bay of Plenty Regional Council has cut back its free youth fares scheme after bus drivers and passengers were terrorised. Regional Chair Doug Leader says about 40 youths aged 14 and under are abusing the scheme by using it to travel to organised fights around Tauranga. He says more government agencies need to step in, but the Regional Council also has a responsibility to help.
When they can go into a public library and communicate with their colleagues by computer systems and move from location to location where they've organised get-togethers and fights with opposing groups, and they use the bus service as the vehicle to get there, we've just got to impede that.
The free fares scheme will move from 24/7 to peak school travel times by June the 4th. The dispute between allied health workers and district health boards has taken a major step towards being resolved. There's been a new offer from district health boards this afternoon, and their union is recommending that members accept it. About 10,000 of the care and support workers went on strike last week and were looking at doing it again. But the PSA says strike action has been postponed, so members can consider the offer and vote on whether to accept it. Allied health workers is a broad term for staff who aren't doctors and nurses, including everything from psychologists and physios to the people who clean surgical equipment. Dozens of households are caught up in Rotorua Lakes Council's legal action against emergency housing providers. The council has gone to the Environment Court seeking enforcement orders against 9 motels. It says the emergency housing motels have refused to engage with council to show they're compliant. Councillor Tanya Tapsell, who chairs the Operations and Monitoring Committee, says it's about making sure the operations are fit for purpose.
When you have motels that were previously for short-term stay, 1 or 2 nights, that's very different to what it's now being used as emergency housing, where people are effectively living in these motel rooms.
The Ministry for Social Development has told Checkpoint there are 65 households with an emergency housing special needs grant staying at the 9 motels in question. The National Party has renewed its call for the COVID-19 traffic light system to be scrapped and replaced by simple mask rules. Ministers this morning reviewed the restrictions and left them unchanged at orange, holding the line before an expected surge in cases over winter. National's Chris Bishop says the framework had its merits at the time, but it's time to move on.
We need to get away from this culture of every month or so the minister turns up and announces that we're staying or moving to a certain level.
The traffic light settings will be reviewed again in late June. Some golfers say Auckland Council's plan to develop golf courses into more versatile public spaces is misleading and unfair. The council has been asking local boards to acknowledge it isn't sustainable to have $2.9 billion worth of land locked up exclusively for golf across 13 courses. It wants to tweak land use rules to accommodate other activities such as walking, running and cycling. But speaking on behalf of Auckland Golf, with the support of Golf New Zealand, Jacob Cameron has been visiting local boards in Auckland, asking them not to endorse the plan.
This draft golf investment plan is filled with outdated information and factual errors. The plan does not provide a fair representation of the true value of golf or golf facilities to Auckland.
Jacob Cameron says the council hasn't taken into account a recent boom in golf's popularity. Nelson artists Nicola Romney and Alan Clark can now be named as the pair who falsely used the identities of two Māori men to make it look like it was them delivering threatening flyers. Romney and Clark were sentenced this month after seeking a discharge without conviction and continued name suppression. The judge at the time refused to discharge the pair without conviction but imposed no further penalties. And Russia has been accused by the head of the UN's World Food Programme of declaring war on global food security. Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea threatens food supplies for up to 400 million people. The BBC's James Landale reports it won't be easy to access food stranded in Ukraine.
The only solution really is to go by sea. Odessa is the only potential port. The trouble is that is blockaded by the Russian Black Sea Fleet. There is also a huge defensive minefield that has been laid by Ukrainian forces to defend the city. So to get food out, get grain out, would require the Ukrainians to remove those mines or agree to them being removed, and secondly, some way of deterring the threat from the Russian fleet.
That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, geographer Louise Richards and Waikato University Māori Resource Management lecturer Sandy Ringham explore Māori geography. Tony Stamp samples the new Radiohead side project, The Smile. And in Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, Auckland University physicist Jan Eldridge discusses exoplanets. But why do they always seem to have exactly the same atmosphere and gravity as Earth? I mean, what are the odds? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland to Taranaki, partly cloudy with isolated light showers, mainly in the west. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, and from Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly fine with frosts tomorrow morning, becoming cloudy from Hawke's Bay southwards tomorrow evening, and isolated light showers developing. The Central High Country, also from Whanganui to Wellington. Fine breaks, but cloud increasing tomorrow evening, bringing isolated light showers. For Buller and Westland, cloudy periods and isolated showers north of Hokitika, mainly fine farther south. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha, mainly fine with frosts tomorrow morning. Isolated showers developing in Dunedin this afternoon. Then cloud and isolated showers spreading to the remainder of Otago, Canterbury and coastal Marlborough tomorrow. Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy with scattered showers, clearing from Fiordland tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with showers more frequent tomorrow. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A chicken burger without the chook and mince minus the meat. That's just a couple of the plant-based meat alternatives the government's backing. My loaning Kāpiti company Sustainable Foods more than $1.2 million of taxpayer money. The money's from the $200 million Regional Strategic Partnership Fund that aims to build sustainable, inclusive and productive regional economies. Minister Stuart Matt, who signed off on the deal, says the products are healthy, cheaper and more sustainable protein options. And Sustainable Foods CEO Justin Lemons joins me now. Kia ora, Justin. 1.2 million. What secret recipe are you brewing up with that injection of funding?
Kia ora, Lisa. Lovely to be here with you this evening. Look, in terms of the secret recipe, that is just a part of the recipe, to be fair. So we've just completed a capital raise outside of that of securing $2.5 million from private investors. And so, if you like, that provides us a good range of money to then look towards our investment areas into product, people, and plant to actually generate the products themselves.
So, where do you think the growth is in this market?
The growth is significant, Lisa, and it's coming for a number of different reasons. And so, if we look at the needs and the changes that have actually happened. Population growth, we've got 2 billion more people joining the planet in the next couple of decades. Our current systems aren't scalable. We don't have any more land to actually convert to feed the additional people, and we're consuming larger amounts of protein as well. Our food system is currently very resource intensive. The impact of that on greenhouse gases, and then the clear path that diets that are higher have a higher plant-based percentage are actually providing better outcomes. So in that sense, that's the need that we're really looking to address.
So are your ambitions more offshore?
We have very firm ambitions both within the domestic market and also the export market as well.
And so specifically export market, where do you want to be?
Yeah, sure. So our targets, Lisa, in that front, we're looking to build revenue to 20 million by 2025, with half of that coming from export revenue. And our focus for that export is markets within the APAC region.
So in terms of sustainability, do you know how you stack up? And, if you pick a meat product, whether it's a chicken burger or a steak, how do you stack up with one of your products in terms of sustainability and emissions? What's the comparison?
Yeah, look, that's an excellent question indeed. And I think the fair answer to that question is it does depend where the product is grown and or farmed to be compared to. But to answer the question quite succinctly, if we just look at one indicator, which is water use, for a plant-based burger compared to a animal-based burger, we're looking at water usage that's 80% less than the animal counterpart.
In terms of your marketing, it highlights health and nutrition and sustainability. Are these, I call them fake meats because I suppose they are, right? They're plant-based proteins, but they're marketed as chicken and mince. They tend to be highly processed. They have quite high fat and salt content. So are they healthier than actual meat?
Look, and again, I think it's a really good question. There's always products at different ends of the scale that either meet our dietary intake or they don't by a number of different producers. But your products, Justin, I mean, I was looking at your plant-based chicken burger, right? And the salt for a portion of that is about a third of the recommended daily intake. And the Heart Foundation has a warning on its website telling people to be careful about meat alternatives because they are highly processed and high in sodium. So what would you say to that? Oh, look, I think that's an absolutely fair comment as well, Lisa. I think also that if you look across the range of our products and also our product development journey that we are on, we're certainly looking to ensure that with our dietary intake and the products that we're producing are actually at the recommended or lower. And our hemp-based chicken that we're about to release certainly has a really good profile on that front.
Because also looking at the product ingredients, right, there's a mixture of things. Some of them I had to Google because I have no idea what they are. Methyl cellulose, acidity regulator 263, colour 150D, thickener 415, glycerin and maltodextrin. I mean, how do you market that against, say, marketing for chicken when you say the ingredient is chicken and the ingredient of steak is beef?
Yeah, look, absolutely valid point, and there's no moving away from that. And again, Lisa, I'd probably come back to the fact that it is a journey around change. If you look at our hemp chicken that we're about to release into market now, it has 7 ingredients, and they're all straight natural ingredients, as are the other ingredients that you have mentioned. In terms of processing, it's a matter of looking at that and also an appreciation of processing. We do live in a world of prepared foods, and you can say that a potato chip itself is highly processed because it goes through multiple steps. Again, for us, it's a journey. We're focusing on converting from international supplied ingredients to New Zealand supply chain. And if we revert back to our hemp chicken that we've talked about, the hemp is grown locally here in New Zealand, and we've developed that in a great collaboration with Reddit Institute and Greenfern Industries.
What about price point? So I know there's top end, prime steak and all the rest of it, but if we look at the middle of the market, how does your product compare to cuts of meat like, chicken breast or even tofu?
Yeah, indeed. And I think at the end of the day, when people are looking at change, when there's barriers to change,
it makes it more difficult, and the life cycle of change is longer. So the thing we like is familiarity, so products that are easy to use, so hence the burger and the sausage format is the start of that journey. Taste is obviously key. We can come back to that one. But price parity is really, really important. And we have already taken steps to address that. The international products on the shelf are priced significantly higher than ours. We've already taken those steps to move towards that. But it's also worth mentioning, as you sort of said, where the benchmark sits. Are we comparing ourselves to a 70-30 mix of beef mince or a Wagyu steak? No, we're not. We're looking at a comparative premium mince and or a free-range chicken price. But again, we're on the start of a journey, and as we convert to New Zealand's supply chain and get efficiencies around manufacturing, we're certainly looking to improve on that price parity position.
Really interesting to talk to you, Justin. Thanks for joining us. That is Justin Lemons, who's from the Sustainable Foods Company. He's the CEO. Anthony Albanese has been spending his first full day as Australian Prime Minister on the world stage, preparing to meet the leaders of the US, Japan and India. He flew to Tokyo yesterday, soon after being sworn into office. Back home, perhaps the most pressing item on the new Labour government's domestic agenda is the promise of job creation and job security. The ABC's John Daly reports.
Good afternoon, Classic Recruitment, Nick speaking.
At a recruitment firm in the Queensland city of Toowoomba, Nick Hannant has more jobs than workers.
The best option will be to send through your resume and then we can set you up for a meeting with one of our consultants.
Demand for his labour hire services has risen 20% in the past 6 months, as business owners grapple with the lack of skilled workers.
So we've got roles for regional arts, we've got a bookkeeper position, warehouse staff, truck drivers, sales, administration. We try everything. We post on Seek and LinkedIn and all the normal websites. We do Facebook. We've got signs out the front of the office. We've tried absolutely everything.
Toowoomba's Chamber of Commerce President Kate Venables hopes the skills shortages will be top of the agenda at the new Labour government's planned employment summit between unions and employer groups. One thing she's keen to see is an attempt to make it easier for skilled migrants to come here.
And continuously what we know is that the bottlenecking that occurs in visa permission land, in terms of the eligibility criteria, and then also in terms of the forms, the documentation, it is a nightmare. Red tape is strangling growth.
Labor's already made promises about improving real wages growth and reducing insecure work. Labour law expert Professor Anthony Forsyth from RMIT University says unions will be putting pressure on the government to quickly follow through on election promises.
So having Labor follow through with that submission to the Fair Work Commission in the annual wage review case that's now unfolding. And then the other side that they'll really want Labor to take action on is tackling the proliferation of insecure work. And the unions are really going to want Labor to act on same job, same pay for labour hire workers, which is one of Labor's key policy commitments.
Professor Forsyth predicts industrial relations might be a tricky issue to navigate. Business wants a simplified enterprise bargaining between workers and individual employers, while unions want broader scope for industrial action and a return of industry-wide agreements.
This is where we could see the idea of lockstep between Labor and the unions fraying to some degree.
The government says the summit will help shape the preparation of a white paper on full employment, which will report back on how to tackle underemployment, casualisation, job insecurity and long-term unemployment. It will be prepared by the Treasury Department and done within Labor's first term.
It's 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A Russia diplomat has resigned from his international post, saying he's ashamed of his country and the invasion of Ukraine. Boris Bondarev, whose LinkedIn says he's worked at the Russian mission to the UN in Geneva, says he is now considered a traitor in Moscow. It's a rare public expression of discontent and came on the same day a court in Kiev issued a life sentence to a Russian soldier in the first such war crimes trial. The BBC's James Waterhouse has more from the capital.
This wasn't just a trial. It was Ukraine's day in court, with all eyes and cameras on 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin. By legal standards, his journey to this dock has been quick. More than 2 weeks ago, the Russian soldier was questioned over an alleged war crime.
We started moving. On the way, we saw a civilian talking on the phone. I was ordered to shoot and fired one round at him. He fell down. we moved on.
Today the court heard how Shishimarin shot a 62-year-old man, Alexander Shelipov, 3 to 4 times in the head. He was one of 5 Russian soldiers who'd stolen a car and drove into a village in the northeastern Sumy region. He claimed he was ordered to kill Mr. Shelipov over worries he'd give away their position.
This clearly isn't an ordinary trial. Vadim Shishimarin's country, Russia, denies deliberately targeting civilians in this war, but it's the 21-year-old alone who's facing a Ukrainian courtroom. His case, though, won't be the last.
After 40 minutes, Shishimarin learnt his fate. A guilty verdict and a life sentence.
The court had to study all the evidence meticulously and make an absolutely legal decision because the whole world is watching this case.
I'm not satisfied by the verdict, with the classification of this crime and the punishment. If a person is found guilty and sentenced, I believe a life sentence is too much.
The Kremlin has voiced its disappointment, but its response is already in motion. Plans are being drawn up to try some captured Ukrainian fighters as war criminals.
The World Health Organization says monkeypox can be contained in countries outside of Africa, where the virus is not usually detected. Monkeypox has now spread to at least 16 countries outside of Africa, including the UK and Australia. If you still don't know exactly what it is, take a listen to this report by the BBC's Fergus Walsh.
More than a dozen countries in Europe, North America and Australia have reported cases of monkeypox, the biggest outbreak ever seen outside Africa. But it is not another COVID. Experts stress the overall risk to the public is low. So what is monkeypox? It's a virus found in animals, including monkeys and rats, in several African countries, which occasionally infects people. The first outbreak in humans was over 50 years ago. It usually causes a mild illness, though it can occasionally be fatal.
We've seen a few cases in Europe over the last 5 years, just in travellers, but this is the first time we're seeing cases across many countries at the same time in people who have not travelled to the endemic regions in Africa.
What are the symptoms of monkeypox? Symptoms can take up to 21 days to appear after infection. Key among them is a rash, often on the face or genitals. This develops into blisters and finally scabs. It can be mistaken for chickenpox. Monkeypox usually resolves within 2 to 4 weeks. So, how do you catch it? Monkeypox does not spread easily. It requires close contact, mainly skin to skin, and exposure to the blisters which contain the virus, or contact with clothing or bedding of an infected person. It can spread through coughs and sneezes, but is much harder to catch than COVID. Many of the current cases are in gay or bisexual men.
It's very important not to stigmatise. Infections don't choose people's characteristics. We are talking about spread between people with close contact, and therefore anybody who has close contact with somebody else with monkeypox is potentially at risk of coming across it and acquiring the infection.
New photos have emerged of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson drinking at an event in Downing Street during lockdown. They're believed to be from a leaving do for his communications director, and at least one person who was there has already been fined by police. A rival politician says Mr Johnson has taken the British people for fools. The BBC's Chris Mason reports.
It's the 13th of November 2020. The country is in lockdown, and this is what was happening in Downing Street. The Prime Minister raising a glass, holding forth, bottles littering a table as a senior colleague is given a send-off. And the rules at the time? No person may leave or be outside of the place where they are living without reasonable excuse. We now know there were 2 gatherings in Number 10 that night. Boris Johnson was asked about one of them in the Commons 6 months ago.
Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister. Mr Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
We now know at least one person at the drinks do was fined, but the Prime Minister was not.
This is clearly not a work meeting. This is clearly a gathering, a social gathering that was clearly against the rules at the time. Now, Boris Johnson knows this, and he knew this all along, and he's just tried to lie to the British public, and it seems like he's laughing at them now. I think it's appalling. People will be disgusted by it. I'm pretty certain of that.
Remember, Angela Rayner and Labour's leader Keir Starmer are themselves subject to a police investigation over an alleged COVID rules breach. Before the pictures of the Downing Street do were published this afternoon, the Prime Minister was on a school visit in Orpington in South East London this morning.
Oh, come on, come to our party, love from... That's so nice of you.
Lena, you invited us to a party.
Thank you very much.
To our Jubilee party on Friday, sir.
Wonderful, thank you.
After this invite from a pupil, he was asked by a journalist about the imminent report into lockdown parties by the senior civil servant Sue Gray.
I'm, with great respect, not going to comment on or give any running commentary on her report until we get it. And I think that, to be frank, the moment is not very far off. It can't be long now before I'll be able to say something.
Top seeds are tumbling out of the French Tennis Open underway in Paris. Four-time major winner Naomi Osaka has been knocked out of the tournament and suggested she might not play at Wimbledon. The All England club has banned Russian and Belarusian players because of the war in Ukraine. In response, the ATP and WTA have stripped the Grand Slam of its ranking points. The BBC's Craig Templeton reports.
12 months on from leaving Roland Garros under a cloud, Naomi Osaka was back, but far from her best. She withdrew last year after being threatened with expulsion over failing to fulfil her media duties. The former world number one has admitted to struggling with anxiety. Here, a double fault came at the worst possible time. That mistake gave Amanda Anisimova the break. She took full advantage and took the opening set. The American knocked Osaka out of the Australian Open in January. She'd done it again. Osaka out of sorts, and afterwards suggesting she might not play Wimbledon. There'll be no ranking points at the All England Club this year. The WTA and ATP's response to Wimbledon, banning Russian and Belarusian players.
I would say, the decision is kind of affecting, my mentality going into grass. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to go there. I'm the type of player that gets motivated by, seeing my ranking go up or, stuff like that. So I think the intention was really good, but the execution is kind of all over the place.
The defending champion Barbora Krejcikova also had issues with her execution. She took the opening set against Diane Parry, but then it started to unravel. It was the Czech player's first match since February, and it showed. Another error, and it was over. A stunning win for the French teenager. Needless to say, the crowd on Philippe Chatrier approved. The shocks continued on court Suzanne Longlon as another top seed fell. Australia's Isla Tomljanovic had too much for Annette Kontaveit, winning in straight sets. But the best player in the women's game at the moment made no mistake. Iga Swiatek has won her past 5 tournaments. She took less than an hour to see off Lesia Sharenko, another dominant display on the clay.
In the UK, the Queen has visited this year's Chelsea Flower Show, being driven around in a buggy to view an array of gardens. The event, which has this year returned to its traditional spring timeframe, features floral tributes to honour the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. As ABC's Helena Wilkinson reports, Dame Judi Dench and Joanna Lumley also put in an appearance.
Driven by a member of the royal household, the Queen visited some of the tributes celebrating her Platinum Jubilee year. She's missed several events recently, but this is one of her favourites.
Simon, you're right in the way, but come over here. So this has been created by Simon himself.
On her tour, the main display in her honour, a 4-metre high floral portrait.
We've got 1 tonne of steel as a frame in the lovely platinum purple, and then it supports 70 terracotta pots, one for each year of her reign. Within the centre we have a silhouette, again of Her Majesty, using gorgeous rosemary for remembrance and an assortment of British trees.
The show has finally returned to its traditional late May slot. Over the next week, up to 140,000 people are expected to wander through these spectacular gardens, each one planned to perfection and with its own story to tell. One has been made for children who have been treated at Liverpool's Alderhay Hospital. It'll be transferred there once the show's finished.
What's this one, Betty? That one's mint. You smell it. Ooh, smell the mint. You smell the mint.
Betty, who's 4, spent months in intensive care after she was born prematurely.
I think it's that opportunity to explore and to have those connections in the world that you don't get when you're stuck in hospital.
Before the gardens open to the public tomorrow, some well-known faces have been enjoying the displays.
I've got everything actually. Lemons on my lemon trees dropping off, which I pick every night for gin and tonic.
I planted a Himalayan silver birch. It's absolutely beautiful.
Over the next week, thousands of visitors will be able to enjoy the gardens in all their spring glory.
So many of you getting in touch about alternative plant proteins or fake meat. This person says, Franken food, no thanks. Veronica reckons I'd rather grow lentils, only one ingredient, little processing. And another listener says it's not fake chicken or fake meat, it's plant-based protein as a meat alternative. Call it what it is and be accurate, a plant-based meat alternative, which eventually Lisa did. Yeah, they market it as bacon and chicken though. Another person says, of course it's fake meat, otherwise colour it purple. And this one, what's the point of investing in fake processed meat? How about teaching people to cook with natural proteins like beans, nuts and cheese? That is all we've got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated. If you missed anything on the show, check us out on Spotify. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up speaks to golfers who want the plan to repurpose some Auckland courses hit into the long grass. See what we did there?
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Allied health workers will vote tomorrow afternoon on a new offer from district health boards. 65 households are caught up in legal action by Rotorua Council